2 episodes in, and Lioness has already blown up Joe's cover, put her family in a safe house, and left her captured somewhere off the grid. Episode 3, The Bear is Infected, is where the show finally stops reacting to the chaos and starts hunting for the reason it happened in the first place. And the title tells you everything about where this hour is headed. This isn't about an outside enemy anymore. It's about figuring out who inside Joe's own world let the enemy in. So let's break down everything that goes down in Lioness Season 3, Episode 3. This is a full review of Lioness Season 3, Episode 3, The Bear is Infected, ahead. If you haven't watched it yet, this is your last chance to turn back. The war didn't just find Joe's front door, someone opened it for them. The episode opens on something Lioness rarely gives us. Joe, stripped of the operator persona, apologizing to Neil directly for dragging the war straight into their home. Every mission Joe's run up to this point has technically stayed overseas, contained, something Neil could live beside without ever really touching it. That illusion is gone now. The enemy didn't just threaten her career this time, they walked up to her actual porch, which means Neil and the girls are exposed in a way they've never been before. It's a small, quiet scene, but it's doing a lot of work because it reframes everything that follows. Joe isn't just running an op to protect her team anymore. She's trying to prove to her own family that she can still keep them safe at all. We also get confirmation that Joe's family has been relocated to a safe house at Camp Peary, which tracks given how badly their actual home address is compromised at this point. There's a quiet dinner scene with Joe and her daughters, Kate and Charlie, and it's worth noting that Kate already knows what her mother really does for a living from last season, but Charlie doesn't. Given how exposed this family already is, it feels like only a matter of time before Joe has to have that same conversation with her younger daughter too, whether she wants to or not. That's the kind of secret that gets harder to protect the more collateral damage starts piling up around it. This is where the episode really sharpens its teeth. Joe, Cruz, and Kyle head to an off-the-books black site to interrogate Oleksandra, the Ukrainian double agent who fed them the original intel on Alexei Yurimov back in the premiere. She was picked up at the end of episode 2, and Joe clearly suspects she's the one who tipped off the Russians about the extraction, whether directly or as part of some longer game. When Joe finally confronts her, Oleksandra tells her flatly that the men who came after her family weren't her people. Technically true, since she's been working both sides as a mole inside Russia's own SVR. Joe doesn't take that answer well, and the confrontation turns physical fast. Here's the thing, though, I don't think Oleksandra's actually the leak. Everything about how the show frames her in custody, bloodied and telling her interrogators that they have no idea what kind of monsters they're really dealing with, plays less like someone caught in a lie and more like someone getting punished for something she didn't do. If the CIA starts leaning on her family to force a confession, and there's a strong suggestion in this episode that they do, that's exactly the kind of move that could turn a reluctant asset into an actual enemy. In other words, Joe's team might be about to manufacture the very traitor they're trying to catch. If you're enjoying this level of scene-by-scene digging, subscribe and turn on notifications. We're breaking down every episode of Lioness Season 3 the moment it drops. She's not the snitch, but if they keep treating her like one, she might become exactly that. Cutting back to the present, the show finally gives us a clearer look at where Joe's being held. Some kind of dim, underground facility chained to a bed, clearly at the mercy of whoever grabbed her off that street. It's a bleak, stripped-down sequence, and it lines up disturbingly well with Oleksandра's warning about monsters the CIA hasn't fully reckoned with yet. Whether that's a literal description of Joe's captors or something more specific to whoever's actually running this operation, the show is clearly building toward the idea that this goes well beyond a simple prisoner exchange for Alexei. Back at CIA headquarters, Kaitlyn tells Byron that a coincidence is really just a conspiracy nobody's caught yet, and it's one of the most loaded lines of the episode. On the surface, it reads like Kaitlyn talking about Oleksandra, given how neatly the timing lines up between the extraction and the attack on Joe's house. But knowing this show, that line is probably doing double duty, hinting at something bigger sitting underneath the surface of this entire operation. If Kaitlyn's already thinking in terms of conspiracies rather than isolated incidents, that tells you leadership suspects the leak runs deeper than one double agent sitting in a black site. There's also a tense moment involving Two Cups and Randy, who are driving Joe's daughters somewhere, likely school, when a black sedan starts trailing them. They don't wait around to find out who's behind the wheel. They immediately break off and get the girls somewhere safe. It might end up being nothing, but given how thoroughly the Russians appear to have mapped out Joe's team already, it's just as likely they've been tracking everyone connected to her, not just Joe herself. Either way, it's a chilling reminder of how far this threat has already spread beyond Joe personally. Here's my biggest concern heading out of this episode. It looks like Joe and her team walk away convinced they've found their leak in Oleksandra, which would explain why Joe eventually goes back to living in a home the CIA already knows is compromised. She believes the threat's been neutralized. But if Oleksandra genuinely isn't the source of the leak, then the real informant is still out there, still embedded somewhere close enough to feed information about Joe's exact movements. That's a mistake with enormous consequences, because it means the team stops looking in the right direction at the exact moment they need to be looking hardest. While Joe and Cruz are dealing with Oleksandra, Byron is still fighting the episode's other war, the one being waged in briefing rooms instead of black sites. After his confrontation with the Russian ambassador in episode 2, he's now stuck managing the political fallout of that exchange while simultaneously simultaneously trying to keep the agency's official story about the doorstep shooting from unraveling. It's a thankless position, honestly. Byron has to project total confidence to people above and below him at the exact moment the ground underneath the whole operation is shifting. If Keitlin's right that this is a conspiracy rather than a coincidence, Byron is the one who has to decide how much of that theory gets shared upward before it's confirmed and how much stays buried until they have proof. That's the kind of decision that can end a career if it goes wrong in either direction. Say too little and you look like you covered up a breach. Say too much too early and you tip off whoever's actually responsible. It's worth pointing out how central Cruz has become to these high-stakes decisions this season. She's not just tagging along to the black site interrogation. She's standing next to Joe as one of the people Joe trusts enough to bring into a situation this volatile. That's a meaningful shift from where Cruz started the series, and it puts her in an increasingly uncomfortable position. The closer she gets to Joe's inner circle, the more exposed she becomes to every consequence of Joe's decisions, good or bad. If Joe really has misread Alexandra and the actual leak is still out there, Cruz is now standing close enough to that mistake that it could end up costing her too, not just Joe. There's also a quieter dynamic worth watching here. Cruz has spent this season wrestling with her own doubts about the future of the job, about whether trained operators like herself are becoming obsolete against faster, cheaper technology. Watching Joe make an interrogation call this aggressive, and possibly this wrong, adds another layer to that doubt. If the people running these operations can be fooled this badly by their own instincts, that raises a different kind of question than the one about drones and machine. Not whether soldiers get replaced by technology, but whether the judgment calls made by seasoned operators like Joe can actually be trusted when the stakes get this personal. Cruz watching her mentor potentially make a career-defining mistake in real time might end up shaping her own arc just as much as anything happening on a battlefield. The Bear is Infected earns its title by making the scariest threat in the episode something you can't shoot your way out of a system that's already been compromised from the inside, with no clean way to know who's actually safe to trust. Joe's confrontation with Alexandra is the emotional centerpiece of the hour, but the smartest choice the episode makes is refusing to hand you a clean answer. If Alexandra really is innocent, the show has just set up a much darker version of this season, one where Joe's own paranoia and desperation for an answer end up creating the exact threat she's trying to prevent. That's a far more interesting story than a simple mole hunt, and if Lioness commits to it, this could end up being the episode the whole season pivots around. It's also worth noting how well this episode balances its two timelines without ever losing momentum in either one. The past timeline interrogation gives us the tension of watching Joe make a potentially disastrous call under pressure, while the present timeline captivity scenes remind us exactly what's at stake if that call turns out to be wrong. Most shows would struggle to make both halves of that structure land with equal weight, but Lioness has gotten remarkably good at using the flash-forward format to build dread in both directions at once. We're worried about what's happening to Joe right now, and we're worried about the decision that got her there in the first place. That's a difficult trick to pull off week after week, and this episode manages it better than either of the two before it. There's one more thing worth sitting with heading into episode 4. The strongest episodes of this show have always come from forcing its characters to choose between operational logic and personal loyalty, and The Bear is Infected spends its entire runtime setting up exactly that collision. Joe chose to trust her read on Alexandra over the possibility that she might be wrong, and the show is clearly betting that choice comes back to haunt him. Kaitlyn is choosing how much of her own suspicion to voice before she has proof. Byron is choosing how much to protect the agency's image versus how much to actually investigate. Every major player in this episode is making a version of the same bet, gambling that their instincts are sharper than the information they don't have yet. That's a genuinely tense place to leave an audience, because on a show this committed to punishing overconfidence, you already know at least one of those bets isn't going to pay off. That's the full breakdown of Lioness Season 3, Episode 3. Let me know in the comments whether you think Alexandra is really the traitor, whether Kaitlyn's coincidence line is pointing at something bigger than anyone's caught onto yet, and whether Joe's team just made their situation a whole lot worse. Subscribe so you don't miss the Episode 4 breakdown the moment it's live. Thanks for watching.